Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. Super excited about the podcast episode we have coming your way today. We are getting closer to the start of the Kansas football season. KU wrapped up its training camp at the end of last week. This week, they're going through a mock game week to get ready for week one of year 6 of the Lance Leipold era. Today, we're going to be joined by Henry Greenstein of the Lawrence Journal-World. We're just going to break down camp. He and I have both been at all the press conferences, all the practices. We're going to go in depth on maybe some storylines from camp, where the quarterback battle's at, and everything like that. Before we dive into the podcast, though, I want to let everyone know we still have our VIP sale going on. You get 60% off an annual VIP subscription. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it, bottom right-hand corner. You can use the promo code JHawk60. It's also going on for the next week, so make sure you take advantage of that. We got lots of VIP content coming out. We've done stock risers. We've done depth charts. I've got a confidence meter coming out on Wednesday. Plenty of VIP coverage, and of course, basketball and everything that comes with your VIP subscription, recruiting. You're going to get all that over the course of the next year. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring Henry in and make sure you're checking out all of his great work for KUSports.com, the LJ World. He did his own depth chart. He was a little more heavy-handed than me. He did not use an or on the entire depth chart. I copped out at a couple spots. So make sure you're checking out all of Henry's great work. Henry, thank you for joining the podcast. Are you like me, and are you just ready for some actual football to talk about instead of a lot of what ifs or could be's?
Absolutely, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. This is one of my favorite times of year. It's when the months and months of almost baseless speculation give way to actual concrete stuff we can talk about. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you for plugging my depth chart. You could call it courageous to avoid the ors. You could also call it stupid. Whatever the case, I hope you all look at it. And Michael and I were actually in accord on a lot of things. Maybe we'll talk a little bit later on about some of the ways in which we differed. But yeah, we are just a few days away from KU's first real depth chart, although how much that actually reveals to us remains to be seen.
Well, and every year it's different. I think what was it, 2 years ago, maybe in 2024, KU did not use a single or on the depth chart.
Yeah.
And then you get years like last year where it was double digits with the or. So we'll have to see what kind of mood Lance Leipold and the KU communication staff are in. If they're feeling like a giving mood and they're going to be straight to the point, or if we're going to get some intrigue. And I think that's probably the best place to start, Henry. What's your prediction for the first depth chart of the year at the quarterback position? Because that's going to be what everyone's eyes go to first, right? This is not past years where you knew that it would be Jalen Daniels and then either Jason Bean or last year Cole Ballard. Do you think they're going to go with an or on the first depth chart of the year? Or do you think we're going to get some clarity on the quarterback battle next Monday?
I think they will absolutely do an or they will find some heretofore unknown way to put them both on the same line without using an or. I think that I feel even more certain in my conviction than ever before that this is going to be something that goes up until the first snap of the Long Island game, and perhaps even beyond that, because Lance Leipold seems more willing than he ever has been before to keep this competition going and keep the actual starting quarterback, or at least who will play the most snaps at quarterback, as close to the vest as possible in the lead up to the Missouri game. It's really interesting, and this is something we've talked about and others have talked about, just the idea that in the spring, Lance said he doesn't want to do a two-quarterback system because it's important for your starter to get a certain amount of a rhythm. Well, he's also said he wants both of these guys to play consistently, perhaps even throughout the season. So where do you find that balance? And if Cole is the starter, it's probably easier to envision a role for Isaiah as the number 2 than it is in the opposite scenario, because Isaiah has a unique skill set that probably puts more stress on defenses when he's a player who appears sparingly. But talking to the quarterbacks a couple weeks ago, Isaiah Marshall said, like, the coaches haven't discussed with them what their role would look like as a number 2. So very, very interesting. KU fans are used to seeing quarterback competitions. I think they're probably scarred from some of the previous ones, but this one could go in some interesting directions, because I honestly thought for a long time that the Monday depth chart would tell us, but now I'm not so sure anymore.
Yeah, well, and it was last week we were going through the past quarterback battles of naming, Thomas McVitie and Carter Stanley. even Lance Leipold's first year, right? Miles Kendrick was a part of the quarterback competition that ends up being Jason Bean. It's been a thing for Kansas over the years that some of these quarterback battles go all the way until the season opener. But like you said, Henry, I think the verbiage and the way the coaches have gone talking about the quarterback battle has really shifted, I think, over the course of the year. And even I think the start of camp. I've got a quote here from Lance Leipold from the first day talking about the quarterback battle. He said, quote, "I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's a time that whoever's going to be out there or out there the most needs to work with a certain set of guys. And we are aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's day one. And then we get to media day last Thursday. And instead of that, it's, well, they're all going to play. The season opener could be a way to evaluate it, or kind of open to anything. And that's the first time I think we've really heard, Andy Kotelnicki or Lance Leipold go with we're open to anything. And that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure out here is this just a smokescreen of we're just going to be super vague, or is this a real thing where now there's more uncertainty around it?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things you mentioned that I wanted to address. I think that if Lance heard your point about, well, are these guys really getting the amount of time with the guys that they need to, in reference to what he said early on, he'd probably say, and I think he said this on Hawk Talk last night, time recording this, like, what was it? Each guy's gotten 400 reps or something with the first team or whatever it is. So, or maybe just 400 reps total. Either way, I'm sure his response would be that these guys have both gotten plenty of opportunities to work with all the different personnel on offense. But yeah, I mean, I think it is to a certain level, probably a smokescreen with an eye toward that Missouri game. But even then, will we be clear on what the plan is for the rest of the season? I'm not sure. Will we come out of the bye week knowing who's going to play the most of snaps at quarterback? One thing that I think it's important to keep in perspective with this competition in a lot of ways is two unproven guys who had both been in the program is how quarterback competitions used to be for a long time.
Yeah.
Before the transfer portal era ran rampant and the expectation was that you would get someone like Alonzo Barnett, Jaden Craig, I don't know, who are some of the other JC French, other Big 12 transfer quarterbacks. Before that was the expectation for a power conference program, quarterback competitions were like this. So I will give them a little bit of grace for not going after a big name in the offseason, especially given the amount of money you allow them to spend elsewhere on their roster. And I think fans should be a bit more circumspect in that area. But at the same time, I don't blame anyone on the outside, whether that's a national reporter or anything else, from looking at this competition being like, really, these are the guys you're choosing between? But for a long time, that's what college football was like. And I honestly think, and we'll get into this more, but I think if KU can get something close to mid-level Big 12 quarterback play, it could be pretty good this year, but we'll see.
Yeah. So I think Jack and I maybe talked about it in our pre-camp episode, like middle of the conference quarterback play with this roster probably means 5-7 or better. Because if you took last year and said Jalen was very much an average quarterback in the Big 12, which over the course of the season, the numbers showed you he was pretty smack dab in the middle on a lot of numbers. Well, if you believe that this year's roster is better than last year's roster and is more deep, theoretically, you should get better results. Now, granted, the schedule and the way things play out that way, that's a different challenge. But I think with the quarterbacks, it comes down to if you're going to do the two quarterback system, I agree with you, Henry. It's going to be Cole Ballard because it's easier to have him start, and you can bring in Isaiah as that dynamic guy, and you can rely on his athleticism. And the question really is then going to be, can they stay healthy? Because if you're going to run the quarterback and get to more maybe option stuff, if you think KU is going to play a little bit more like they did in 2022, then it's how can you keep them healthy and how can you make sure that they're in positions to have success? And, so much of that's just going to be a question until you get to Missouri. And I went back and looked at it too. The Tennessee Tech game for KU in 2022, and they blew out Tennessee Tech. That was a game that KU didn't really show much. And then you get to West Virginia, and that's a game where all of a sudden you saw it all, right? You saw all the motion. You saw some of the triple option stuff, the deception. And then the D coordinator for West Virginia the following week's like, yeah, we didn't expect any of that. I think, to your point, Henry, that's probably what they're thinking about with this Missouri game, is keeping that in mind of how can you give yourself the best chance of beating a Missouri team whose roster costs $10 million more.
Yeah,
maybe,
I would say so. I think that's about right.
That's a pretty big deficit. And so how can you make a competitive advantage? And I think this kind of maybe goes into it.
I do too. I think it was probably a similar scenario in 2023 as well. I mean, granted, they were more of a known entity at that point because of what they had done the previous year, but that Missouri State game allowed them to conserve a lot of stuff for Illinois the following week. And, that's when they ran those weird screens with the linemen split out wide and the jet sweeps and all that stuff. And honestly, in a lot of ways, that game was one of the peaks of the program in recent years, that primetime Illinois game. So anyway, I think they also on a Friday night, I feel like this is a similar scenario,
Ooh.
I think we'll see them be very, very vanilla against Long Island. And, as for Missouri, I think you're right. They spent a lot to bring in some big name transfers. You think about that linebacker they got from Kentucky, Austin Simmons, the quarterback. At the same time, some of the areas where they threatened KU most last season, like the pass rush, not quite as good as they once were. So I think KU has a legitimate shot in that game. I think it's going to be tough. Missouri will be an AP top 25 team when they come to Lawrence, but I don't blame anyone on the KU coaching staff for trying to conceal as much as they can in advance of a matchup that really could tilt the season in a lot of ways.
100%. And again, like I've started to look across kind of the, Monday got me thinking. You see quarterback kind of the flow is starting of people naming their starters.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking, right, and Iowa is going to have a 2 quarterback battle go into the season. I saw UNLV is going to have the same thing with Dan Mullen. So it's one of those things where you pretty much made a decision yesterday. Either you're leaking your quarterback to Thamel or you are taking it into the season. And so I think you're seeing kind of some of that picture become clear. And is it good? Is it bad? It's so hard to say, right? Whatever argument you want to make, you can make because there's no facts behind it. So it'll be interesting. So, all right, Henry, let's transition away from the quarterbacks. Obviously, camp, about 15 practices. We get to go to a bunch, in the mornings for about 20, 30 minutes, see a little bit of stuff, listen to coaches talk to other people. For you, biggest surprise during camp? What was the thing that maybe you didn't expect, a theme that emerged? What was maybe your biggest surprise during camp?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways you could go with it. I think that I'm really excited to see what they get from the defensive ends this year. I think with how much they've talked about Leroy, it was one thing last year when he came in at 230 and he was up to 250. Now he came in at 230, he's up to 270. And so between that, them calling Dak Brinkley the best pass rusher on the team, them saying David Santiago had one of the best camps of anybody, and Alex Bray seemingly being a bit improved with another year in the program, more opportunity to work on his own body, and probably one of the leaders of the defense outside of Trey Lathan, Taylor Davis, Jalen Todd. Maybe Alex Bray is like number 4 on that list. I think there's a lot of reason to like what they have there. I didn't even mention Garrett Martin, who we probably think will get like 10, 15 snaps a game as the 5th guy at that position. So, and I really feel like, you look at Leroy Harris last year, he led the team in sacks and pass breakups. That's a fun stat to break out, especially for someone who was completely unheralded entering the year and could have redshirted. But you also look, and he didn't really do a lot of damage the last half of the year in terms of sacks. And I honestly think there were a lot of games last year where between Dean Miller not having as much impact as he was expected to, there really was not much of a pass rush. And when you have a young secondary back there, you need to do something to take pressure off of them. This year, I really firmly believe they can do that. And that together with another year of experience for all those returning guys in the secondary provides some optimism that they'll get things right. I also just think in general, it seems like the defense as a whole is more confident, and that really comes down, it really trickles down from the defensive coordinator. I think DK McDonald, you can only read so much into a press conference, but he seems more self-assured than he was in his first year as a coordinator. He thinks they have new kinds of bodies that can help them do more of what he wants to. When you think about, obviously they lost McAlpine for the year, but having a true nose in Eamon Smalls, if he's healthy, having Jabril Alameen to serve as a 3rd linebacker or even a Craig Young type when they need that, having a wealth of different options. Now we'll see who's good at it, but a wealth of different options to play nickel. Like another offseason transitioning into what DK McDonald wants to do could be really beneficial for the defense. So I think there's reason to expect improvement. Obviously, they were really bad in clutch situations last year. I think the confidence on the defense was a very popular theme. The defensive end stood out to me the most in that respect, but I think it's something that could be universal among a lot of position groups as well.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that theme of the pieces on defense coming together, and you can find, I wouldn't say established, but you can find the right role for certain players. And I thought it was very interesting, right? You go back to the start of camp, and DK is talking about the different types of bodies, right? And you talk about Dean Miller being 6'4", 225, 230. You talk about Justice Finkley being 6'3", 250. In the roles and the things they were asked to do in those roles, was that conducive to them performing at a high level? Bengali Kamara, the way they used him. And now you can look at it and say, okay, well, if you are going to do some of this even odd front stuff, the emergence of David Santiago as someone that could play either side is really important. Obviously, you think Alex Bray can kind of play where Justice played last year, where he's playing inside, he's playing outside. You got Leroy, who with his size, you theoretically could do the same, but it seems like he's probably going to continue to play rush end. You got Dak taking another step. But then at linebacker, too, you think about it. Last year you played Trey Latham, but how often did KU move Bengali down to the line of scrimmage, and then all of a sudden it's a 5-man front and you have one linebacker? Well, it's a little bit different this year with the way you could use some of that, like you mentioned with Jibril Al-Amin. You go 3 linebackers, 4, 5 guys up front, and you can kind of really stack the box. And the way that this has kind of come together, where in the spring it's okay, hey, Bam Crouch is banged up, Jabril's a little banged up. You don't really see it all there. Then you go to the nickel spot, right? Mason Ellis had surgery. Keyshawn Cummings-Coleman had surgery. Saeed had surgery. Like, guys didn't do much in the spring. And now, obviously, you got to see with nickel who's healthy to start the year. But you've got more options. And so you look at the optionality throughout the defense and the way that guys improved over the course of camp, and you feel better about KU's ability to potentially answer questions offenses pose, where the depth, you've got different guys that can do different things. And I just think that was a big question going into camp was, could these guys come together, or would it be another situation where it's just, hey, Trey Latham, Quincy Davis, go out there and play 80 snaps and we'll see what happens, right? But now that you've got more depth there, I think that's definitely, I agree. I think that's one of the biggest surprises, and it makes me very interested to see what the defense looks like.
Yeah, at Big 12 Media Days, Trey Latham said that thing about, that Missouri game where he played 80-something snaps or whatever it was. He'd get knocked to the ground and he'd be like, man, I really got to get up again, because they had no one else they could put in at middle linebacker. So the idea that, and I think this goes to them, I can't say for sure that they've hit on them yet because we haven't seen them play, but it at least appears that KU has hit on several transfers that people like us did not have maybe the highest expectations for of all time, if that's fair to say. When you think of someone like Quincy, who was a non-starter at a group of 6 program, or Santiago, who was good at Air Force, but really didn't play or have the positional fit he wanted all that much at Michigan State. And we'll see with some of the cornerbacks, we'll see how much of a factor Roman Pearson is, for example. I have Austin holding on to that outside corner spot, just because I feel they have so much invested in his development and his progression. But I think Roman will play a lot. All it is to say, like, it at least appears that their evaluations aligned with what they wanted out of the players that they got in the portal. And so we'll see if that translates to on-field results. But absolutely, linebacker is a good example of, like, how much, I mean, you obviously want to have your best players on the field as much as possible, but how much better can Trey Latham be when he gets to take a drive off at some point in the third quarter?
Yeah, and the coaches don't have to worry about is, whoever, who would have been backup Mike last year? Ezra?
Yeah, and they had Ezra in the beginning of the season. I think they had Gilliam in there a little bit at times. Yeah. Not the right fit at that position.
No, and obviously, last year the injury for Joe Sip just totally wrecked his season, and you weren't able to see what maybe he could have offered you at that Mike spot. But it's just one of those where the pieces are there, and it makes everything comes together once you've seen what they did last year, and you figure out that, okay, they're going to do this mixed front stuff. You're going to play with some different looks. Well, you got pieces now, and this is where the depth, right, that Lance Leipold's talked plenty about over the course of this year really does show up, where on the 2 deep, you got guys that are experienced. Like Jaden Harris is not going to start at boundary safety. 2 years ago, Jaden Harris started on a Miami defense that won 9 or 10 games.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a good player, and obviously injury has impacted him a little bit during camp. But that's like the biggest difference for me. And I think that's where like the most confidence comes in on the defense, is just the fact that they've got the bodies, and now it's going to be on the coaches to, week to week, have the right game plans and call the right plays at the right time. And obviously the players have to go and execute, right? Got to catch the interception if it's in your hands. That's it. Several players who dropped them last year, right? Those are the key plays that KU's got to make. But in terms of like what you want to hear going into a season defensively, it's about as good as you could have hoped.
Pretty much, yeah. Two drops last year that swung the outcome of 2 games, really. Or I guess also you could look at the defensive holding on Leroy's pick 6 at Arizona too.
I still haven't seen a replay of that. I still haven't seen a replay. I was watching some of these games back a couple weeks ago, and I haven't seen it. No replay.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention the whole coverage safety thing, which is another area where they think they have a better positional fit. After kind of forcing Taylor Davis to cover a lot more than he probably should last year, bringing in Corey Gordon, Christian Pritchett, at least theoretically means that he can play more naturally in the box more often. So I think that could help a lot in terms of guys who relish the opportunity to cover as safeties.
Yeah, well, that maybe brings, at least from my opinion, like what's your biggest concern on defense? For me, it would be how the secondary comes together.
Yeah,
it's been a group that's been banged up, right? Austin Alexander tweaks his knee a week before camp starts. He misses some time. He's limited. He's doing a lot more now. He said last Thursday that he feels like he's back to 100%. But then you've got a question, okay, who starts, him or Roman Pearson? How does Saeed Gibbs fit into all this? You've got the safety spot, right? Can Taylor Davis take a step forward? Can Jaden Harris get healthy to where he could push Taylor Davis during the season? Corey Gordon, the guy that I feel like going through all of this has kind of been more of a mainstay at that, field safety spot where you expect him to play in space and cover. And then it's like, okay, Jalen Todd, you're back outside. What I think everyone would have liked to see maybe a little bit more last year. But for me, like, and maybe I think you said you agree, Henry, but like how the secondary comes together for me is kind of the area where I'm most iffy on the defense.
Yeah, that cornerback 2 position is my biggest area of concern on the entire team besides quarterback. Like it probably goes quarterback, cornerback 2, right guard. I mean, I guess you could look at other secondary positions. I already mentioned nickel. We're not sure exactly how that's going to work out. I think Cummings Coleman's like a logical choice to slot into nickel, and they recruited him with the idea he could do that. Just a question of whether he's been healthy and consistent enough during the time he's been healthy to show that he needs it or deserves it. We've heard a lot about Trey Brown. I wonder how much of that is an artifact of just having numerous reps at his disposal, or if they actually plan on playing him as a freshman. Realistically, I think he probably ends up being a core special teams contributor. It's nice now because freshmen can play as many games as you want with no impact on their eligibility. And I think a few guys come to mind that will probably be able to take advantage of that. This is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's relevant. Trey, Corbin Glasgow on special teams. Depending how thin the D tackles really are, we could see Naquan Carter there at some point. They seem to like him, and DK mentioned him once. So, but I think that we'll see young players contributing out of high school in various capacities, which is something that has not been a huge facet of the Lance Leipold era. But yeah, going back to, I guess, concerns, I think secondary does take the cake. They got to force turnovers. They went all of last year without a cornerback intercepting a pass. Everyone's seen those stats about KU having 4 interceptions last year. I have no idea how Cincinnati only had 2 interceptions last year, which is crazy. I mean, one of their cornerbacks, I think, went to the NFL too. But in any case, they got to force some turnovers. I think everyone on the defensive coaching staff is aware of that. The players themselves have brought it up, volunteered that without even being asked about it. I think Jalen Todd says he's going to take more chances this year, which he's probably one of the only players in the secondary that I'd be comfortable hearing say that. I think Todd could have a breakthrough season. So there's that. Other things that strike me as a concern, I alluded to right guard. I'm not 100% sure that the vision of the offensive line they seem to be going with, and we can get into this more, is actually their best one, or just the one they chose because they had a guy playing center all off season who they want to keep having playing center. I think a lot of it ultimately depends on how good Connor Stroh's camp has been and how capable they think he can be, or if DeAndre Harper has been so good that he can surpass Stroh as an option. But yeah, it sounds like they're going to go with the Kaysen Carpenter at center vision with Amir left guard, which means there's still kind of a pending position battle at right guard. I think we both think Tavake is probably going to start there, but I also think they'll rotate at that position and try to figure it out as the season goes on, as they have in recent years with other spots like that.
Yeah, let's get into it then, Henry, because I think offensive line is one of those where if you're going to say going into camp, you kind of had it with how KU does it, right? You always have a feeling that something weird is going to happen with the offensive line. And this year it was Kaysen Carpenter getting a little banged up, so they moved Amir Herring to center to try and work through that. When you go to practice and you see Amir Herring snapping, and you see Tavake, Tuikilavatu, and Connor Stroh next to him, it's a pretty big line, and it would be KU's biggest offensive line under Lance Leipold, right? If you have Nick Moreau, Calvin Clements as your starting tackles, and then you go, Stroh, Herring, Tavake in the middle, that line comes out to about 6'2", 328 pounds, like over an inch bigger than the other offensive lines and like 8 to 10 pounds heavier than the offensive lines in recent years that they've had. So physically, right, that's the one that looks great on paper. But the issue about on paper is you don't know how it actually comes together and how it plays on the field. And I think that's something that is just very intriguing because it doesn't seem like the Herring at center experiment lasted really that long. And the fact that Leipold said to a media day, right, that, Herring is back where he belongs at left guard, that for me was like, oh, okay, that's not happening.
Yeah, I mean, we see something like that in practice, or you do. You're more observant in these practices than I am. You see something like that in practice, and your thought is, okay, is this something they're actually doing, or is it an injury-based contingency? Well, I think we all thought this was something they were actually doing, but then as soon as Lance Leipold came out a few days later and said, yeah, it's been okay, it hasn't been as consistent as we like, then I was like, all right, they're probably not doing this. And then, as you said, it really seems like it was more of an injury-based contingency at this point. So interesting to contemplate. But yeah, it seems like we're back to where we thought we were most of the offseason.
Yeah, and even then, you look at the right guard spot, and the word's been that Tavake's taken a step forward. He's been more consistent. But even then, it's one of those where he played a little bit last year, didn't play as much at the end of the season. It's still for me going to be a question until you kind of see it on game days, where I feel like at tackle, right, you can expect Calvin Clements to take a step forward in his second year as a starter, right? More confident, he's stronger. Something Koldenecki talked about too was his pass protection has been better, and that's the area where he really just struggled last year, was especially against super athletic defensive ends. He really struggled with his technique. And so you can expect him to take a step forward now that he's more experienced. And Nick Moreau playing right tackle, right? Even if he played left tackle at Cal, he's got experience, right? He played in the ACC, he's been up against athletic DNs. It just comes down to that right guard spot of, Stroh, who was a starter at Texas and lost his starting spot and left, or, Tavake, who was beat out by Herring last year. And so it's just one of those where it's going to be a question, I think, until you see it consistently. And even then, I think he probably still rotates that spot.
Yeah. I will say this for Calvin, too. It will help him a lot not to have to go up against the murderer's row of defensive ends he did last year. When you think about a season that early on included going up against Damon Wilson, had David Bailey and Romello Height at the midpoint, and finished with John Henry Daly. It's not going to be comparable to that this year. I think it might be a down year for Big 12 pass rushers. Now, obviously, Wendell Gregory at K-State has high expectations, stuff like that. So there will be challenges, but I think it will also help him that he doesn't have quite the unenviable task that he did last season.
And let's be real. You look at Koldenecki and what he did with the offensive lines in 22 and 23. The ability to put those guys in a position where they are not on an island or under stress. And I think that's a key part of this. You got the coaching staff now where, Koldenecki's shown that they can throw out, Earl Bostic at left tackle, and he's athletic. Okay, how can you put him in a position to be successful? And he gets a camp invite in the NFL, right? You get Bryce Cabeldue developing over the course of time. You've got guys that in the past maybe haven't had the NFL upside of being a real draft pick like Pooney, but they've been able to be really good college players like Michael Ford, really good college player. And that for me is when I look at some of the guys on the line right now, it's like, okay, yeah, Calvin, Moreau, they have NFL bodies. So can you tap that in and help those guys then maybe reach that new level? And if KU gets consistent tackle play, I feel even better about the ability for this offense to be a little bit more consistent than it was last year.
Yeah. And not that KU's offensive line was extraordinary last season, but I do think, and Daryl Paulsa said things like this, he does deserve the benefit of the doubt a little bit, in part because of what you said. Like, there are a lot of positions where I will not necessarily give KU grace, like the secondary that we discussed before. But the offensive line in recent seasons has not always seemed like it's going to be the most cohesive unit. And it always, at least to some form, comes together as something functional. That's not to say KU didn't have rough performances last year. I alluded to Texas Tech. Missouri was another one. But I think that both with Scott Fuchs during his tenure and Daryl Paulsa, they've shown an ability to make the most of what they have at their disposal. And I think they'll probably do that again this season.
Yeah, I agree. So now let's transition, Henry. The area that you have the most confidence in offensively is what?
Running back. Absolutely running back, without a doubt. I think this is the best group of running backs Leipold's had during his tenure, and that is pretty impressive to say, considering that they had the all-time leading rusher for his first 4 seasons. I just think in terms of the fact that you have 3 guys who have been leading rushers at a power conference, or not power conference, 3 guys who have been leading rushers at a collegiate program at various points during their career. That's a good start. And then you have a freshman who, if he gets healthy, has been one of the more impressive freshmen that they've had in some time. Now, I think the Corey Mockery hype train has slowed to a stop a little bit due to injuries during camp, and we haven't heard about the severity of whatever the most recent injury he's been dealing with has been. So I don't expect him to play as much of a role this year as maybe we thought coming out of spring. But setting that aside, KU has never had a complementary running back duo, in my opinion, at least in recent seasons. The idea that you have 5'9", 175 and 6'1", 230, and they're both established guys who know their roles and neither one of them has to get 25 carries, I think is really appealing, both in terms of looking at an individual game in a vacuum and looking at the wear and tear across an entire season. You know, Dylan Edwards has only had double-digit carries in a game 5 times in his career. And sometimes he does really well with those. He had like 190-something yards in the Rate Bowl in 2024 and 166 against UCF last year for K-State. But he's not a guy that you want to be your bell cow. Well, fortunately, you've got a bruiser between the tackles who can do that. I expect them to split Dylan Edwards out wide and put him in the slot a lot. I think part of that has to do with not being the deepest wide receiver room, but part of it has to just be with just getting him in space and how much Kotelnicki loves jet motion. I think just this group of running backs is perfectly tailored to the kind of deploying different skill sets in different parts of the field that Kotelnicki loves so much. And I didn't mention Dupree. It seems like he's starting to get it together a little bit. I'm still not totally sure what his fit is or what his role will be. I keep comparing him to Dylan McDuffie, just in terms of the role I expect them to have. There's a little bit in terms of their skill set too, but it's mostly in terms of the role. You know, Dylan McDuffie had 45 carries for 253 yards and 4 touchdowns in 2023. I think that's probably pretty close to what I expect out of Dupree this year. We'll see. I just feel like that's a great deal of depth. And again, like Daniel Highshaw and Leishon Williams, you had 2 options, but it felt like one of them was always hurt. And when they were both healthy, they provided the same thing. That is not going to be the case this season.
100%. Like there was no explosive ability in the run game, right? Like that's the biggest thing.
Except for Leishon's touchdown against West Virginia, there was no explosive ability.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, one play, one carry out of an entire season where they showed breakaway speed. I'm still like, why didn't they play Leishon more? But that's a different podcast. You look at this year, and you're right. It is a good blend of skill sets. Yasin loves running between the tackles. Like as we wrapped up media day the other day, we're walking out, and I mentioned that the stat that he was more efficient between the tackles compared to running outside the tackles, which is kind of counterintuitive. If you think you're running into an area of mass bodies, you will not be as efficient as you are running in space. He loved it. He was like, yeah, of course. I got to hit the hole hard. I was like, exactly. So he's going to offer that bruising ability. But then if you want to get somebody out in space, you've got Dylan. And I totally agree with how they're going to use him. He's one of your most talented players on offense. You can't really put him in a box and say you're just going to be a third down scat back, right? You got to find other ways. And it wouldn't shock me if he plays kind of your 30-ish snaps a game and he touches the ball 12 times a game. And the other bit he's used as a decoy to get the eyes of a defense moving, because the one thing about him is you don't know when he's going to get the ball. And when he gets the ball and you're off by a foot, he could take it to the house. He's got that explosive ability. Dupree is one that is interesting. Are you going to see, let's say Yasin is your kind of 15 to 18 carries a game type of guy. And let's say you give Dylan 5 a game. All right, that's about 2023. And you get the quarterback some carries. And yeah, it may be a situation where Dupree isn't getting a ton, maybe early in the season, and he has a wave in the middle of the year as you try and manage the reps of a Yasin to make sure he can go a full season. Maybe that's how he fits into this, but the depth of the room is there. You just got to keep the guys healthy, right? Can Dylan have a healthy season? Can you keep Yasin from getting banged up with his physical running style if he's going to be running into the middle, of the trenches? So I love what you've heard about them during camp, right? Yasin has had a great camp. And it makes me really interested to see how KU is going to use the option game to help the run game as well. If you're going to play Cole, he may not be Isaiah in terms of his speed and athleticism, but he can still move and he's a physical runner. And if you're going to use Isaiah back there, then man, that's a lot of dynamic speed. If you have a play where you've got Isaiah Marshall and Dylan Edwards with an option, like that's a lot of stress on a defense. So running back is, I think it is one of the strengths of this offense, and the creativity the coaches have shown in past years with the run game makes me just flat out excited to see how they're going to put these pieces together this year.
Yeah. And of course we're talking about 2026, but I would be remiss if I did not mention that all of the players in the running back room have additional eligibility beyond this season. I would love to know how KU thinks they're going to make that work beyond this year, because it should be very interesting to see who, and it probably has a lot to do with who gets what amount of work this year, but who comes back will be very, very interesting to see. But that's as you said, another podcast for another.
That's a podcast for December 1st after the season, when we have a full year of data, I guess you will. So Let's go here now, Henry. Big picture. I guess let's do specialists. So, we can't forget about the specialists.
Yes, I did put them on my depth chart. I did.
I did. I should have, but I didn't. I just didn't put the specialists on there. Is there anything intriguing to you about the specialist? Obviously, Matt Gill is going to punt, and then Martin Cunnington is going to be the kicker. Anything interesting there for you, or that you feel like maybe special teams can be a strength? Because last year KU special teams last year was elite. I think it was top 10 in SP Plus. Like, it was elite last year, so it's probably worth talking about.
And if Lath had a stronger conclusion to the season, it could have been even higher. Unfortunately for him and for KU, he fell off a little bit at the very end there, and hoping we'll see him catch on with another NFL team, because I think the Steelers released him a day or two ago. They had Chris Boswell anyway, but this year's specialists, it's kind of a wait and see for me. Matt Gill has never played an American football game before. It's not a thing like Finn Lappin, where he already had a year of being one of the best punters in FCS. So we'll see. Reviews are positive. And Martin Connangton, he's kicked at a high level. It's just that he says he feels comfortable to 55. I'd like to see more evidence bearing that out, as opposed to last year at Michigan State, where he was not very effective from beyond 40 yards. So we'll see this season. Just a couple other things that I'm wondering about. I don't know if Connangton will do kickoffs or if it'll be Dane Eford. Leipold alluded to that a little while ago. Eford is a sophomore walk-on. I guess redshirt freshman, same difference now, right? Yeah. Redshirt freshman walk-on from Branson, who apparently has a strong leg. Would there be any circumstances this year where there's a kick beyond 55 and they try to have him do it? I don't know. They tried that with Owen Pieper-Gertis a couple years.
That they did.
And they have a long snapper as their holder now. Leipold said that too.
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, Reno's holding? Whoa, that doesn't make any sense.
No. Reno's snapping, but Hollis Moeller will be the holder as well as the backup long snapper. I don't know if it's just a thing where – because I remember they didn't have they haven't had some of their Aussies hold in the past. So I wonder if it's when you have an Aussie come over, they are not as experienced with it. So you try to find some other person to do it. So yeah, you'll see like someone wearing 44 holding this year. Is that his number? Something like that, which is unusual.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing too, like the last time they got an Aussie punter, Damon Graves, he wasn't very good. And so
Yes.
that for me is just an interesting dynamic of, okay, the last time they added someone like this, he wasn't very good, but is there something you could learn from that in terms of the way you scout and evaluate? Was it just a weird situation where then Damon goes to altitude and kicks a little bit better?
Yeah.
I don't know, but then on the return front, it seems like Tate Nagy will continue as punt returner. Wouldn't shock me if in big moments, right, you throw Dylan Edwards back there. Kickoff return is interesting. Bryson Hayes is someone to watch, I think, for that spot, just with his overall top end speed. And then I think, again, another one of those where you could put Dylan back there if you're really like, yep, we need a good return here. The return game is just interesting to me because you've got Dylan now, who is just such a dynamic athlete. And you look at what he did on special teams at K-State, like I'll be just the times in which you decide to use him back there is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think they got to take some risks and put him back there as much as they can, especially on kicks. I think Tate will be better on punts this year. Not that he was super flawed last year, but he even said to me like proactively, he was like, yeah, I got to get north and south more. I mean, if you watch, especially the early games of last season, it's like just going from side. And that one return, I was rewatching this recently. There was one return, I want to say, against like Fresno State, where he went right up to the sideline and then kind of went back into the field. Yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing that quite as much. I think it'll be more of a straight line. But Tate Nagy, by the way, most return yards by a KU punt returner since Nick Harwell in 2014.
So
is that good or bad? Is that your next question?
Well, no, actually, it's good. Did that factor in Trevor Wilson's return?
Yeah.
It did?
Yeah,
okay.
If you look at the 2023 season, Trevor Wilson's return touchdown was like one of 4 returns that he had. They really didn't bring back punts a lot.
Yeah, they said fair catch it.
Yes, and then, so Dylan Edwards has a punt return touchdown into his name in 2024 at Kansas State. I think they got to give him a chance on some of those units, and I'm excited for special teams in part because of the thing I talked about earlier with the freshmen. I think we'll just see a lot of fresh faces out there, and maybe some of them can make an impact.
100%. And even then, you've got guys like Malachi Curvey. Like, you got to find ways to get the kid on the field, to get him more live game reps. And even if that maybe doesn't happen when the live bullets are flying, Big 12 play a linebacker, hey, can you go be on all the returns and all the coverages? Can you go be a core 4 guy? I agree. I enjoy the special team stuff. In the past, it was fun just trying to track who had the snaps and who was going to be used what week. But I think for everyone's sake, it's a better situation now that you don't have to do that. Okay, Henry, let's wrap it up with this general vibe for this season. Obviously, it is Kool-Aid season. I think it's very rare that you leave a camp and you're like, I'm more down on this team than I was before. So with that in mind, what's your vibe like for the season? You don't have to give like a record, but if you want to give a record prediction, you can. But like just generally, what's your vibe of this going into the year?
I would say like very cautiously optimistic, very, very cautiously. Both because I haven't seen these quarterbacks play for an extended period of time, but I feel that they can be better than they were last year at like 6 position groups, about equal at a couple more, and then they probably won't be much worse at like any more than 1 or 2 of them. There's reason to believe they're improved in a lot of ways. The thing I keep telling people, though, is I can be cautiously optimistic about this team's quality and just not feel super great about their chances of having a good record because of the way the schedule shook out. And we don't need to relitigate it, but a lot of it has to do with not getting the Middle Tennessee game moved to week 0. And by the way, I reported this a few weeks ago. They still have to pay to move it. So Middle Tennessee is now getting more than $1 million for this completely unwanted October 3rd game against them. So yeah, 9 games in a row after the bye. It's going to be tough. But then again, they had 3 byes last year. It didn't go all that great for them. So Yeah, cautiously optimistic. I think I have drunk the Kool-Aid with regard to the defense a little bit, if that wasn't clear from some of what I said earlier on. I think they can be better, and kind of like what we said about the quarterback play. If they can be an average Big 12 defense, I think the talent at the skill positions, we didn't talk much about wide receiver, tight end, but I think they've got solid options there. I think that the talent at the skill positions is really enticing. And I just want to see what they do because this is as much, if not, this is probably the most unknown we've had going into a season under Lance since his first year. Last year was close, but in terms of like the sheer number of transfers combined with the quarterback competition, we don't really know what we're going to see. And I'm excited for it.
Yeah, and even to some degree last year, you didn't know what you didn't know. You didn't know DK McDonald was just going to totally rework the entire defense. You had a feeling it'd be some different fronts, but you didn't know it was going to be an entirely new defense.
Yeah, it's close. It's close between this year and last in terms of the most unknown.
Yeah, and I wonder with this year, like I agree with your point. This year's team could be better and have a worse record than last year's team. Just because of the fact that you look at who they're playing and you look at where they sit in the rankings of who's paying the most for rosters. Sure, you're not playing Tech this year, but you play BYU, you're playing Utah, you're playing Arizona State, you're playing TCU. Well, out of the most expensive rosters, I think those were 5 teams, you're playing 4 of the top 5. It's just a tough break. You're not really playing your Houstons, your Arizonas, the teams that are maybe more on KU's tier or Cincinnati, So it's one of those where you're going to need some breaks to go your way. And I'm really interested to see how KU does in some close games because there are going to be close games. Is this the year where the dam finally breaks? I've mentioned it before, but you go back to like Matt Campbell at Iowa State, they could not buy a win in a 1-score game. And then all of a sudden over the course of 2 years, they won every freaking 1-score game out there. They make the Big 12 title game twice. And they have some of the best seasons in program history. You don't know when it's going to change. To some degree, it's luck. To some degree, it's coaching. That for me is very interesting. But yeah, I would agree on cautiously optimistic. You just wish you knew what you're going to get at quarterback.
Yeah,
and if you had an idea of what you were getting, I feel like you could go big on a prediction. But
the 1-score. Yeah, they could. The 1-score game thing has become like the defining question of the Lance Leipold era. I mean, they've been trying to solve this for the last 2 off seasons. And as agonizing as some of those 2024 losses were, like last year at Arizona and against Utah were as bad as it has gotten. And they've tried all sorts of things in terms of fourth quarter execution. And we'll see if it makes a difference with different offensive play caller and different personnel this year. And maybe they can close some games out. And as you said, the pendulum swings back in their favor. They progress to the mean in this case and end up going 7-5 or 8-4 because they win 5 1-score games or something. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows, honestly. And it's so weird when you look at the schedule, right? And I feel like the season kind of comes down to October into November because the start of the season is what it is, right? You're playing Missouri. It's going to be a challenging game. You should be, your 2 bye games. And then it's a question of Arizona State, Utah, K-State, and Missouri. If you want to count that, like, can you get a win out of that? And if you do, all of a sudden making a bowl game is much more feasible because you got UCF at home. Sure, you play West Virginia on the road, but who knows if West Virginia is going to be any good this year, especially with their quarterback question that they have. You play Oklahoma State at the end of the year. They've got some talent, but again, end of a year, like you don't know what the injury situation could be like, what the motivation is going to be like, So you get to kind of the back half of the schedule, and that's where some of the winnable games are. But that's why the start of the season is so important because the last thing KU needs is go 2-4, and then all of a sudden, where's morale?
Yeah,
How are
exactly.
you guys going?
Exactly. I've been saying the same thing. If they just don't come out of the K-State game 2-4 and having lost for the 18th time in a row to their rival, if there's some semblance of momentum or morale at that point, then there's reason to believe they can split the final 6 games. I mean, it wouldn't be easy. They'd have to beat Baylor for the first time in 17 years or whatever it is. I think it's like 12 times in a row. No, it's 14 straight against Baylor or something. KU is going to have to beat teams it's not expected to beat at some point during this year, probably multiple times to make a bowl game. And, it's been a few years since they've done a lot of that because, well, I guess in 2024, they rattled off those wins at the end of the season. But expectations have come back down to earth. And so now there are a lot more teams that are going to be highly favored against KU. And we'll see if they can channel some of that underdog mindset that they all relished earlier in Leipold's tenure.
Exactly. I love it. Well, Henry, thanks so much for jumping on the podcast. Hopefully everyone enjoys that. Henry, where can everyone find your work? Plug all your stuff. Talk about something you got coming up that you're writing. You're always good at this stuff.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yes. Read kusports.com. Drop me a subscription. We need those. It's a good compliment, frankly, with what Michael does, because in a lot of ways we don't overlap in some of the stuff that we focus on. So
we try not
to. Subscribe to me. Follow me on Twitter at Henry Greenstein. We have a whole bunch more KU Football Media Day content coming out. I was over there with our reporter David Rodish. We have a lot of stories stockpiled over the next few days, and I think some of those will be quite entertaining and shed some light on some players you don't hear about too much. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, Michael, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Henry, for joining the podcast, and thank you to listeners for tuning into the Fog.net podcast. We'll be back with another episode next week. We'll have Jack on. We'll talk about the depth chart, what it means. We'll talk about quarterback if there's an or. We'll talk about Long Island. Long Island plays this week, so get ready for that. I'll have a breakdown on the 10 minutes of the game I watch, and we'll have everything for you on next week's episode. But thank you, as always, for listening to the Fog.net podcast. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice. For Henry Greenstein, I'm Michael Swain. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week.